Hello students, this is your English Studies class. I am your regular English teacher, Oluyede Yusuf. Our topic today is Introduction to Poetry, Definition and Features. In this lesson, we are going to examine the meaning of poetry, and we will also undertake a review of features of poetry. But in this segment, our focus shall be on the meaning of poetry and figurative language, which is one of the features of poetry. By the end of this lesson, students should be able to define poetry, identify features of poetry in any given poem, distinguish poetry from the other genres of literature. I think we can commence the lesson if you are ready. To begin with, what is poetry? Sometimes it is rather difficult to provide a good definition of poetry. Even the dictionary definition of poetry is vague. Why would this be so? Simply because there are many kinds of poetry that almost one kind is untrue of another. When you think of definition, you probably think of something like a verb is a word which expresses an action or a state of being. Poetry, however, is too creative and exciting to be effectively defined in such a factual way. But for the purpose of study, we can say poetry uses imaginative expressions that arouse our pleasure, surprise, emotions, which make us laugh or cry consciously or unconsciously. Thus, a poem is an artistic piece in which the writer uses words effectively to create an imaginative world with real-life experiences. Let's now begin to undertake a review of features of poetry. Features of poetry. Features of poetry can also be regarded at an advanced level as elements of poetry. They are things that distinguish it from other genres of literature. The following are some of the features of poetry. 1. Figurative language. One of the features that make poetry is figurative language. Language that is always based on some kind of comparison that is literally true. Figurative language is so natural to us that it is even found in our everyday conversations. For example, if you are like most people and it is time to go to bed, you will just say, "I'm going to bed." Here you are speaking the literal, ordinary, efficient language of prose. But if you have a touch of poetry in you might use a common figurative expression and say, "I'm going to eat the hay." Let's say you read this in a newspaper. The House Budget Committee hammered at the Treasury Secretary for 3 hours. You don't ask in horror, what hospital was he taken to? You understand instantly the speaker is speaking figuratively. A figure of speech is language shaped by the play of the imagination in which something seems to be entirely different. A figure of speech is never literally true, but a good one always suggests a forceful truth to our imaginations. Let's look at 3 common figures of speech: similes, metaphors, and personification. Similes. A simile is a figure of speech that uses the words like, as, or like to compare things that seem to have little or nothing in common. In literal comparison, we might say, his face was as red as his father's. But when we use simile, the comparison becomes more striking and imaginative. Thus we may say, his face was as red as a desert sunset, or his face was like a spotlight. Similes are part of any poet's equipment. They are tools of the imagination. In a good simile, the connection between one thing and another must be unexpected, but entirely reasonable. William Wordsworth opens a poem with this now famous simile: "I wandered lonely as a cloud." The simile helps us see at once how the wanderer has no more sense of direction than does a cloud driven by the winds. We are going to take a short break now and return shortly.